We did a Kylie themed cabaret night with pop horror, and we called it "I Should Be So Chucky."
Crushes cymbals. I love it. So, welcome back to Boys on Film. Today we're talking about Chucky, or Living with Chucky, which is a new documentary about the franchise, the horror franchise. I am Phil, we are Boys on Film, and I'm very happy to say we have two very special guests. One of those you all know already, because he's a regular contributor to Boys on Film. That's Paul Joseph, who is running himself into the ground on a marathon at the moment while doing a sponsored run.
Yeah, 90 miles in a month. I'm nearly at the end of the month, which I'm pleased about.
So donate. We'll put the link down below, if that's all right.
Fundraising for Missing People, the charity.
Yeah,
so yeah.
Brilliant. And also Dan Clegg, Dan from Nancy Boys, which I got to say is such a clever title for a horror channel, a review channel. But you've been on Facebook for a while, but now you've got a YouTube channel.
I do, yeah. And it's supposed to be kind of an LGBTQ community for horror film fans. That's kind of the aim for it. So yeah. It's very new, just kind of getting off the ground as terms of the YouTube channel. So
I love it. And you've just done an amazing video where you do a tour of the film shoot for An American Werewolf in London. So you visit all the places where they filmed, which is really fascinating.
Yeah, I don't know if you know of them. There's a YouTube channel in the US called Grim Life Collective, and they basically just do loads of like then and now type stuff for horror films, but also like true crime and just like fun little oddities and things like that. So that's kind of the aim. I've done American Werewolf in London. The next one will probably be Hellraiser, but then London is my oyster, I guess. There's kind of loads to go and cover off.
And it's a lot of work as well, because not only the research, I mean, obviously you know a lot about these films already, but actually going to the places.
Unfortunately, I'm a bit of a geek. I quite like editing. I quite like all the process. And actually, a lot of the time, with the werewolf video, I hadn't been to a lot of the locations, so none of it was like a slog. It was like, I actually get to go and see it. So same with Hellraiser. Actually, there's a few bits I've never seen before. So
it's so good, and the slaughtered lamb looks completely different. I did not think it was going to look like that now.
It does, and it's on the video, but I talk about the fact that at Halloween they recreate the pub to look like the pub in the film, and the interior, obviously. So, yeah, it was just really cool to go and be able to sit by that door and be where they were in the film. So that's my thing, and I've done loads of US stuff, but the UK stuff is kind of where I'm going to focus a lot of my attention now. So
keep up the good work. We love it. We'll put a link down below, so everybody must check out the channel and all the latest content that you've done as well. But today we're talking about Living with Chucky, which is a documentary about Chucky, the killer doll. I have to say from the start, I haven't seen all of the Chucky movies in the franchise. I don't know about you guys. I would imagine you both have you?
I have seen them all, though in order, but with kind of gaps. And then, like, I think when I saw the last one, it took me a long time to catch up on what happened in the one before that. And there is also now a TV series. I think I've seen 2 episodes of that.
Yeah, I've seen 1 episode. For some reason, I didn't go back into it. I don't know whether that's because I lost interest or whether I just... Because there's so many TV shows at the moment, I just have to binge them just to get them out of the way. Almost like if I enjoy it, that's fine. But with that, I didn't keep it up.
Yeah, and I think same. Like as they've gone on, I've probably watched them less. I think the first few... I was into it, but I think same as you, watching a documentary like this is trickier when it's not maybe like one of my favourite horror franchises. It's not my go-to. But I know of Chucky, and obviously it's the big one.
Yeah. So this documentary features some interviews with, I would say, some fairly interesting people. I mean, John Waters is in there, Jennifer Tilly, Don Mancini, obviously the creator, director. You know, you've obviously got genuine people that were responsible for the original films and also the later ones as well. So it's not just a fan thing, although there are a lot of fans in this.
Brad Dourif, who is the voice of Chucky, and his daughter, who is now, in the past couple of films, has been the protagonist as well. So there's lots of insider stuff.
Yeah, and a lot of gushing.
Yeah, we'll come on to that, eh?
So Lin Shaye's also in there. I mean, obviously Lin Shaye, she's been in, I think, over 100 films now. She's what some horror fans would say a bit of a scream queen, because she's in Nightmare on Elm Street, she was in New Nightmare, and she's in a lot of the more recent films like Insidious. Yeah. So it's good to have her, her comments on what Chucky means to her.
And Abigail Breslin as well.
Yeah, it's maybe the bit of the film I found a bit odd, that there were a few people in it. I kept thinking, well, why is Abigail Breslin in this? Like, is it because she's in a film? And then I just thought, oh, she's not. And there were a few talking heads where it felt a bit like, actually, I could have done with more detail on the films. And there was a lot of like, I'm a person that likes horror, so I'm going to be here to talk about stuff. Like Marlon Wayans did kind of the same thing, where I'm like, I don't really get why you're here. And it's great. Maybe the filmmaker's like...
I think maybe his connection was, I think he might have been in the odd horror film, but also Scary Movie.
Yeah.
And I think as Abigail Breslin was in the TV show Scream Queens. I don't know whether she's actually done any film horror, but yeah, it was. There was quite a lot of them.
Yeah, and it took me a while to key into that, to be like, oh, they're just here because they're in the horror community, but they've not actually got a link to Chucky at all.
I know what you mean, Dan, because some of it did seem a bit self-indulgent, almost like we're hearing why they love the Chucky franchise, which is fine because that's what it's meant to be about. But it was almost a bit repetitive. It's like some of their comments were on a loop, and I just felt like, okay, we get it. You know, you love the Chucky movies, but it didn't seem much of an insight.
Yeah. At the start of the documentary, it talks about horror and how it was at the time of when the Chucky film when Child's Play, I keep forgetting it's not called Chucky, Child's Play was conceived, and kind of where it fitted within this market, and the fact that you'd started to have through Nightmare on Elm Street films where the antagonist was kind of the protagonist, or they were like the sort of like memorable character. And also, you know, touching on kind of doll horror and how dolls have always been quite effective. So it's quite nice to set that up. But then, as they talk about the progression of the films, a lot of it is about how the films went down a different angle for certain reasons, some of which were budgetary. But then it does become, it's almost like that framing of it within the horror genre kind of sort of evaporates as the film goes on.
Yeah, and I think we'll get on to maybe it's the gushing part, but I think I got an hour in and was like, well, they've covered all the films now, where's this going to go? And I sort of wiggled the mouse and was like, there's half an hour left. And it's then that this sort of piano music kicked in, and it sort of didn't then let up. The last half was just, we all love each other and we all love working with each other, which is good.
It was very much about it was like very much like a family thing, wasn't it? Like we've all worked on this for a very long time, and actually, you know, so you've got the director and the producer, and then obviously Brad, who plays the doll, and then from later films Jennifer Tilly. So it's almost like this merry band of Chuckyites who more join them, and they seem to stay with it. They do refer to some of the people who left the series for other reasons, but I guess probably because of that, a lot of the focus and a lot of the talking is on the later films, which really, when you're looking at it placed in horror and iconic stuff, it's the earlier films, particularly the first film, first and second, I guess, that are the ones that are most that stick in the mind. Even a lot of diehard horror fans might have abandoned the franchise by now. I haven't. There's
some interesting stuff in there, because obviously the creator is a gay man, and he obviously had some queer elements in some of those movies, particularly the later ones. So I was quite interested in that part of it as well. But I guess, like you said, you know, unless you're a Child's Play fan and you know a lot about the movies, some of it would just kind of wash over you a little bit.
Well, and I guess that was maybe my reservation. I wasn't quite sure who this was pitching at, because I think, well, look, someone who's only lightly interested in Child's Play probably isn't going to really get much out of it, because it's very much a fan thing. But if I was really into it, and I don't know if either of you seen like Never Sleep Again, which is the Nightmare on Elm Street behind the scenes. I mean, that is like a 6-hour deep dive into, and every film gets half an hour to 45 minutes each. Whereas I'm like, if you're going to do it, I kind of needed that, because I definitely felt like they breezed through it pretty quickly, to the point where, like, I felt like number 2 got a decent amount of screen time. 1 and 3 were pretty much like, yeah, those were done. And then we got quite a lot, like you say, Paul, on those later ones. And it was a bit like, I just don't quite know who this is going to appeal to.
And it's quite a long documentary as well. What is it, about an hour and 45? Which to me was overly long.
I also wonder if that's the lead actress or the mum in the first film isn't part of the people being interviewed. And there's kind of a reason for that. She's not dead, but there's just a reason for that they refer to later on. And obviously they talked to the boy who was Andy in the first two films, and then got recast, and then kind of came back. But yes, it feels like they've not quite got enough of the people from the first film. They have the sister from the second film, so she's in it a lot. And they do talk quite a lot about, you know, how painstaking the process of using the actual doll was, and how there's so many puppeteers on it at once, all operating different bits, and you know, and it's quite an intense thing for them. But then you could almost like to have broken that down with a bit more backstage footage, some drawings, some sketches, some more sort of like geekery type things, really. And I wonder whether maybe because this isn't, I don't know where this sits. Obviously they do use footage from the films, but I don't know where this sits within distribution companies or whatever, whether, you know, they've not really got access to that kind of like bonus DVD type material. That you might have to really, that I would imagine the film you were talking about, the Nightmare on Elm Street film, you would probably have that. So I think you're right. I think a real diehard fan might be a bit like,
and also I suppose these films are quite controversial. I mean, I know legally probably they wouldn't want to include it, but you know, there was one time when a lot of critics and people that were anti-Child's Play was saying that, you know, it could motivate people to kill kids as well, particularly with the Jamie Bulger case, which I suppose is quite a dark element to include, but you know, it was very controversial, wasn't it, at one point?
I was sort of expecting it, and it got to 3. I was like, oh, and I know that's maybe a very British view, because that seems to be because Jamie Bulger. And I remember I was about those boys' age when that all happened, but obviously it's an American movie, so there was no comment on it. But I think if you were doing a proper deep dive on each film, and every film had got kind of a spotlight, that would have been a really interesting thing to talk about, because it wasn't the film, and it was just, you know, it was just two boys and that was one of the films they happened to own. And Child's Play 3 is no worse than any other horror film coming out at the time. It just, again, it felt a bit like, there was more we could have got out of number 3, and they spent, I would say, 3 or 4 minutes talking about the third one. And that's pretty much it.
And sorry, Docs just said something. Ted.
He agrees.
What was that? What's that? He's fallen down the old mine. Quick.
He's looking for Chucky.
Yeah, the thing with Chucky is you kind of want some of that stuff exploring why the character itself is such this kind of icon, and people immediately people talk about Chucky rather than Child's Play. You know, they're very, and they do explore that a bit, in that they have lots of things of stills of people dressing up as Chucky and Tiffany and all that kind of stuff, and very much those two have become a real identifiable couple. But again, it makes me think there's a bit more fan stuff than kind of film stuff, which then makes you think, adds to that thought of they don't necessarily have the access. Later on in the film, you find out the sort of motivation behind making the film and who's making it, and that also adds to that kind of like inner circle, it's all a big family type thing. So I guess maybe there's not quite the critical eye you would want, that would be maybe saying it's not enough just to talk to all these people who are involved and love it. We want to talk to some other people and get some other things. And I mean, they do have a few. I think they have one guy who's from like a horror magazine and stuff. But you know, it's not often, I'd say. But you might appreciate a bit more input from critics in something like this as well.
Yeah, they had James A. Janice, who I love. I don't know if you know his Dead Meat channel.
Dead Meat, yeah, I was going to say, yeah, he's brilliant.
He's really good, and actually I think him being in it did give it a little bit of gravitas, because I'm like, all right, I kind of buy it if James is in it, because he's just so good on his horror knowledge. But yeah, I think you're right, it probably just needed a bit more of that to set the scene about, well, why should we care? Because, I don't know, Chucky's a really interesting one, because he's not quite the Freddy Krueger, Michael Myers level. Like, he's definitely iconic, but I think he's more iconic for who he is rather than the films he's in, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely, because I know obviously comedy plays a big part in these movies, because obviously when you think about it, a killer doll is quite laughable in some ways, even though he's obviously killing people. But obviously you've got to have that novelty element. More
so as the series goes on, though, it's not like, I mean, obviously the first one does have its elements of silliness, but the first one's quite nasty, and it's they really play it for comedy a lot more later on, particularly once Tiffany joins, and you have like, you know, this sort of like Tiffany and Chucky having sex and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And you see, it is bigger than the films.
So verdict time then, guys. Star rating out of 5. Dan, what are you going to go for?
I hate this bit because I always feel like I'm being really mean. Like, I'm probably going to give it a 2 because it feels really harsh. And again, like, I quite enjoyed it because I like horror, but even I was struggling. And I just think, well, if you're not a fan of this kind of thing, I don't know what else you're supposed to get out of it. And yeah, I did feel like it was a bit cobbled together. Like, what can we make out of what we've got rather than making it like a coherent product? What
about you, Paul?
I will give it a 3 stars because I think it was okay. You know, it's decent. It's well made and it's well meaning. It just I echo that thought. The sort of like duration of the film, balanced with what the juiciness you get out of it about the filmmaking and that character in that film within the sort of genre is a bit lacking.
I think both of your points are very valid. I'm sitting more on Dan's side though because I thought it was overly long. I did enjoy it. I enjoyed elements of it, but I think as a package, I think it was too long and I think it was a bit too gushy. It felt a bit like their party and I wasn't really a part of that party, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, there was that whole weird, I don't know, I mentioned this, there's a really weird section which is all about how hard it is to work away from home, and it went on for so long. It was like, it's really hard being away from my kids, and it's like, okay, this is just we're so sentimental, and it's like, I can't key into that because that's not the world I'm in.
And because they talk about the fact that obviously as the films go on, sequels, the budget is less, and therefore locations are not, they're not filmed in LA or whatever, it's Canada and then it's Romania or whatever. And they talk about that, but then you're like, that's kind of something that applies to most elements of filmmaking. So it's not really a huge insight about the Child's Play films. It's not like saying, people who are making a film where they're spending a month underwater or something really random like that. It's kind of like you're just, that's what it is.
So it's Living with Chucky. Available to own or rent in the UK and Ireland from now, actually. It's available now. Apple TV, Sky Store, Virgin Media, Google Play, and it's available to pre-order on Blu-ray. If we've sold it to you, obviously, Dan and I's comments probably not going to convince you to go buy it, but...
Yeah. I'm hoping that if you hear this review, oh my God, he's terrifying.
We talk about horror dolls a bit more.
That is way more scary than Chucky. Look at the wig.
This is my Cabbage Patch Carrie.
It's creepy,
and
Carrie.
Actually, they do in the documentary refer to how part of the inspiration for Chucky was there'd been this Cabbage Patch craze a couple of years before, hadn't it, of all that sort of stuff. So this is Carrie, and she's here to promote my next pop horror event, which is called Welcome to the Dollhouse, and it's a drag cabaret show at the RVT based on dolls in horror movies.
Amazing. And I believe, Dan, you'll be there.
Yeah, I didn't even know it existed. Forgive me, Paul, until last week when we talked about it. So I showed my friends. I said, "Can you believe this exists? This looks so good." So we're going to be there. And it's one of my favourite films this year, and I know there's going to be a little dance off.
So we'll stick all the details down below, Paul, of that event if it's not too late. When is it happening? 2 weeks?
31st of May. So
okay. So there's loads of time then. So people will see this and hopefully come along if you're in London. Dan, where can we find you? Where can we find Nancy Boys?
So my YouTube channel is harder to find. My Instagram is Nancy Boys UK. I think if you Google Nancy Boys in YouTube, you can probably find me that way. But you can find my American Werewolf in London tour. I might give you the link for that. But otherwise, Nancy Boys UK is my Instagram handle, and I tend to put all my content on there.
Excellent, and we'll drop everything down below in the description box. And Paul, Pop Horror is all on Facebook and Twitter. And
Pop Horror UK, I believe, yes.
All the details on the screen. Brilliant. Guys, how brilliant to have you both on. Thank you so much for reviewing Living with Chucky. Hopefully we've got another movie review soon, and it will be a little bit more entertaining.
We did a Kylie themed cabaret night with Pop Horror, and we called it I Should Be So Chucky.
Crash your cymbals. I love it. Very clever.
That's not what I'm promoting today, though.
Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll return soon with another horror review, whether it's TV show or movie. Speak to you next time.
Thanks all.
Bye. I suppose also added to that is some of that sort of looking at then the character of Chucky and how it's become this kind of cultural icon.
Guys. Sorry. One sec.
All right.
We'll cut this back.
I'll try and remember what I was saying.